We are doing lesson number 11 in the quarterly, the book of Job, and the title this week is Out of the Whirlwind. And the memory verse is Job 38:4, which says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding." What was the point of God's question? What was he trying to get Job? Was he trying to intimidate Job? Was he trying to say, look, I'm the creator. I'm powerful. I made everything. Who are you to question? You've been questioning me. Who are you to question me? Is that what he was doing? By pointing to creation? Or was God trying to enlighten Job with a legitimate question, which would lead Job to acknowledge that there's a lot Job doesn't understand about reality? Which do you think? Intimidation or a legitimate question to try to get Job to step back and go, wait, and maybe I haven't understood all this right? And if it's the second position, that God is actually asking this question to get Job to step back and reprocess and rethink, what is the issue that you think he might have wanted Job to reconsider by asking this specific question? Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth?
There's a bigger perspective than your own personal situation here. There's a much bigger perspective of things going on.
There's a bigger perspective, absolutely. And was there something specific about that perspective that he was trying to hone Job in on? And do you think God was remembering some of Job's arguments previously given by Job, which our lesson helpfully quotes for us in the first paragraph? So let's read the first paragraph and you'll see one of Job's arguments. It says, whatever their differences, the characters in the book of Job had one thing in common. Each had a lot to say about God, or at least about his understanding of God. And as we have seen, much of what they've said we could agree on. After all, who would argue with this? But now ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain it to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In whose hand is the life of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind? And then it goes on to say, and this one, does God subvert judgment, or does the Almighty pervert justice? See, the first quotation there is from Job 12. And it's not one of Job's friends speaking. It's Job speaking. And what is Job saying to his friends when he says these things? See, Job's friends are arguing that Job deserved what happened to him. Job's friends are saying, look, all this bad stuff means you've sinned. You've messed up. You're wrong. And Job responds by saying, look at the beasts and the birds. They'll teach you how reality works. The innocent and the harmless creatures are killed and destroyed by the predators just because they are innocent and harmless, not because they're sinful. Could Job be saying, look around. The world doesn't work like you say, with only the sinful and guilty getting attacked and destroyed. No, the innocent creatures are harmed and killed all the time by the powerful, the strong, and the ferocious. Isn't this what Job is saying to his friends? Look around. If you had a brain, nature would teach you how reality works. But then Job goes on to say this. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? What is Job saying now?
God created all of this, and he has a plan, a purpose.
Sure. I don't think Job is simply saying God created nature when he says, look at the animals, they'll teach you, in the context of arguing why this bad stuff's happening to him. I think Job is saying that God designed it this way. God is the one who designed survival of the fittest, the predator killing the prey. The fear-based system is God's design. God did this. This is how God built nature. This is how God governs. So don't look at me and suggest I'm sinning. It is God who created reality to work this way. That's what I think Job's saying here. Could it be This is why God, immediately when he speaks to Job, the first thing he says, Job, were you there when I created the earth? Did you see how my creation functioned when I built it? You don't know what you're talking about, Job. Creation as you see it is not how I built it. There were intelligent beings there who did see how I created it, and they know, and they sang for joy when they saw it, because they know how things functioned on earth back then. And the death and the pain and destruction on earth today is not how I designed life to operate. An enemy has infected my design, and it is this infection which causes the pain and suffering. And it is the same enemy that has brought pain and suffering to your life, Job.
So in other words, Job didn't really understand himself what God's plan was.
And we're going to get to that in a little bit in the lesson, but yes, I agree. I think Job, and when you unpack the rest of 38 through 40 in our lesson today, you're going to discover my view is that Job was just as wrong about God as the rest of them. And when we find out, and we'll show you the text in a little bit.
How could he have had such a close relationship and been such a good person and not understood God?
Yeah, and so what was it that made him a good person?
Oh, I always thought it was his relationship with God.
He believed in God.
Yeah, he had
God
faith.
said something, even if it's contrary to what he thought, he believed it. He trusted him.
Did Job just take the position, God said it, I believe it, don't ask any questions?
No.
Or do we find Job actually saying, God, this isn't right, I don't deserve this? Now, Job had a lot of misconceptions in his head, but Job knew God well enough, that he knew he could talk to him. He could...
But I'm saying that when God did talk to him, he believed it.
Well-
He said, where I'm a man of, where was I thinking,
And that's what we're going to get to when we get to chat, which is just a couple days down in our lesson. We will get to that. And this is exactly right. Once God has this dialogue, God speaks back and shows him what I just showed you. Job's response was, wow, I had it wrong. Wow, I didn't understand. Wow, I have nothing left to say. And it was after that God says, you have said of me what is right. He didn't say you said of me what was right until Job acknowledged everything he'd said previously wasn't worth speaking and wasn't right. So we'll get to that in a moment. The lesson also quotes, but the big piece here, if you look at it, when Job tells them, consider, look at the nature around you, learn the lesson, isn't he basically saying the innocent get killed by the strong all the time? So you don't have to be guilty to be torn up and destroyed this way. In the world as God designed it and built it, that's what happens. The weak and the innocent get destroyed by the strong.
Well, then did that mean that Job didn't understand that Satan was out there, the cause of sin and suffering that went on in the world?
I think it's pretty clear he didn't have good understanding into that controversy behind the scenes. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear he didn't have good understanding of that.
his buddies didn't either. Because at the end, they said his family and everybody consoled him over the trouble the Lord had brought him. Even after all of that,
Yep.
they still thought that the Lord had brought all that on him.
And so the big difference is Job's friends are saying, before chapter 38, Job's friends are saying God is inflicting this on you. Job is saying, no, he's not. This is just how God built reality to work. That's the big difference. He's not inflicting it, but this is how nature works and God built it. And they were both wrong on that. All right, in the lesson, they also quote another one, which is Bildad speaking. Does God subvert judgment, or does the Almighty pervert justice? What is the implication of Bildad's question? Remember, he's asking the question in the context of trying to figure out why all this bad stuff happened to Job. And so in that context, it's not simply a general question that you come up with no background and no ideas in your mind. Somebody is walking up on church on Sabbath or Sunday morning and saying, is God a God of justice? Does God make mistakes in judgment? It's not just a general question about whether God does it. It's in a context. All this bad stuff's happening, Job, and basically we know God doesn't make mistakes in judgment. And we know he never is unjust. So what's the implication? You deserved it. That's what he's saying. So the questions in just as themselves, isn't it true that God never makes any mistakes in any of his judgments? He always judges everything right, whatever the judgment is. and he's never unjust. So those two statements are true, but how is it that even though those statements are true, they're used in a way to create a falsehood? And this is how subtle Satan is. Satan takes truths and makes falsehoods out of them. Both of these things are true, but Bildad creates a falsehood. What's the falsehood he creates?
God caused it.
That God, who definitely doesn't make mistakes in judgment, and definitely is always just, is therefore the one who did this to you, and you deserved it, Job. See the falsehood built into that.
And it's not just then, it's now too. I mean, nowadays people think that the natural disasters we're seeing are punishments for sin and from God and all of that.
So what caused Bildad, okay, good, what caused Bildad to have this error, even though he understood God's always just and God doesn't make any mistakes in judgment, he got that right. What caused him to apply that in a way to create a lie? What did he not understand that led him to take those two truths about God's character and imply something that wasn't true? What was he missing? Well, do you think he understood there was an enemy out there attacking? He didn't understand that. That's why he's putting it on God. God must be doing it. So he clearly didn't understand the enemy was out there. He didn't have that picture. But if you bring that up and say, well, an enemy's out there doing it. Now, we don't have any argument from Bildad. It's not recorded on this side. But my own experience, when I point this out to some folks, that there's an enemy who does things, I've actually had some Christians argue something like this back at me. Well, God still made the judgments to remove his protection, and even though God didn't actively bring the punishment to Job, God used Satan to punish him. Therefore, God was still responsible because God knew what would happen, and God chose to let it happen, so God punished Job. And Job did deserve it because Job was born in sin and conceived in iniquity, and all humans have no righteousness or goodness, and therefore the sinner deserves only punishment, suffering, and death. Therefore, if God chose to act in this way and use Satan to punishment, then it was right and just on God's part.
God is in control.
Haven't you heard this line of reasoning? This is all corrupted. It's not true. Remember, God removed his hand, but God did not control the choices Satan made. Satan was free to bless Job as he offered Jesus. All the kingdoms of the world I'll give to you, Jesus. He could have given all the people around here to give Job more wealth and more power and so forth, but he didn't do it. Yes?
For me, one of the things that I think that Christianity as a whole miss, and especially when you toss out the Old Testament, that when you go to the laws of God, restitution was always a part of it. It never was from a punishment standpoint, but it was to get you to see that you had done wrong and show you and meet you where you are so that you would change. Jesus himself said that if you have a sin against your brother and you're taking a gift to the altar, what were you supposed to do? You're supposed to set the gift down, go and make things right with your brother, and then come back and then give. Then the gift would be accepted. This wasn't a New Testament teaching. This was throughout the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament sanctuary. Time and time again, there was this principle of fairness and
reparations.
Yes.
And restorations.
And
yes.
Everything he does is for our benefit, is for a restoration to restore the image that was lost in the Garden of Eden. And until we come to understand that, that's what people think.
And so, if hopefully you guys are tracking, because he's exactly right, but there's a core fundamental construct that is foundational to what you said that's different than to the argument made here, and that is what we've been talking about for years now. Which law concept do you understand? The law concept you're describing is design law, bringing healing, bringing restoration, bringing people back to God's design and how he built relationships to do what we can to heal any brokenness we might have caused in somebody else's life. That's reparations, restoration. Okay? This argument that I just read, this is all based on imperial human law constructs. Punishments have to be handed out. Sunday's lesson.